Dr. Matthew Zanis, welcome to the podcast. It is a real honor to have you on the show today, my friend.
Oh, thank you so much, Ashish. I've been looking forward to this one for a long time now. Since we met each other back in October.
I'm really pumped for this conversation. I think this is going to be a little bit all over the place, and we're going to go into some really fun wormholes here. Dr. Matthew Zanis, I don't want to call you doctor because I know that that's probably what you call it in profession, but we're friends, so I may just call you Matthew.
Yeah.
But anyways, I'm just super excited to have you, brother. You're such a wealth of knowledge. You are a incredible focused subject matter expert in the field of movement and body movement and mind-body connection and physicality. And I thought it'd be really interesting to have you on the show today to debunk a lot of thinking and to go deep into some of this more scientific evidence of how we use our bodies to manage our minds and our actions and how we create movement to get what we want. And, you just mentioned this right before we started about our October trip where we got to meet each other and spent a nice weekend together and learned with our good friend Kyle Depius. And you led us through a bunch of activities about, body movement and how we can be more aware and in tune with our bodies. And so I'm just generally super, super pumped about this conversation, brother.
Oh, thank you. And you know me, I've got a very eclectic mindset.
You sure do.
Who knows where this conversation is going to go. So hopefully we can kind of keep it on track and tie in some common themes throughout the whole entire conversation.
And so, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, back in October, it was such a beautiful experience because it was, I think there were 12 or 14 of us men. And I did take you guys through about 90-minute, 2-hour long movement experience. But do you remember what the common theme was behind that movement experience? What was the one thing that I tried to instill inside the group throughout that whole entire event?
I think it was presence or awareness. Yeah. Presence or awareness, one or the other.
There, you nailed it. Look at you. You were listening. I knew I liked you. Yeah, exactly. It was this awareness piece, right? Because when it comes to movement and the human body, the awareness is often one of the most underlying, undervalued factors, right? And this is kind of where my world of human movement, when it comes to working with high-level athletes or even, high-level CEOs and entrepreneurs, they kind of dovetail together, right? Because
absolutely,
high-level athletes and high-level entrepreneurs, we put our head down. I put myself in this bucket too. Like, we get very focused or very type A, and we go hard to the paint on everything that we set our minds to. Like, that focus is great, but oftentimes with the blinders on, we don't really learn. We don't feel into our bodies. We don't really lean into what we're actually feeling, understand what it's telling us. And oftentimes we go down a certain path without any awareness of what's going on. That could eventually lead us into trouble as far as from a physicality standpoint with pain and injury, but then also with our relationships, right? Relationships not only with ourselves, but then our loved ones and also our friendships and platonic relationships and business relationships for that matter as well. I think it's all interconnected.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly why I wanted you on the show today, because I think that, I don't have an audience full of athletes, but I think that when you speak, there's no doubt that athleticism and high sports, Olympics and a lot of the things that you work in, there are lessons to be learned about, strategy and excellence and routine and some of those real hard specific skills that you learn at that highest level of athletics into life, into business, into everyday life, into our relationships. And so that's really where I want to go with you and to figure out how can we unpack some of those lessons. And I guess what I want to start about is breaking patterns. And this is a subject that you led us through a lot, and you talk about a lot about breaking body patterns, right? And I'm just gonna frame the question a little bit broad, and then maybe you can take it because I don't have a full understanding of a lot of this stuff. But we're talking about mind-body connection, and when I think about mind-body connection, we're talking about muscular neuro connections between something that's happening in our body and something that's happening in our mind, and our mind gets used to that movement. But I think what's more interesting than even mind-body connection outside of athletics is like breaking patterns. So when we talk about breaking patterns in our body, you specifically make us do things or move our bodies in ways that our body is normally not used, right? Or used to, which breaks the pattern.
Yeah.
But then there's also day-to-day activities that we have in our everyday life, everyday business, maybe everyday patterns in our relationships that we want to break those as well. And so I'm really fascinated about how we can use our body to help break those patterns of emotional thinking or brain thinking, etc. So I know that's a broad topic, and I know you know enough about it to navigate us. So I'd like you just to kind of take us where you take us. And, I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Well, you know what? We started off this conversation by me saying that all these things are interconnected. They kind of translate and transmute into each other. And while that's very true, I also believe in the gift of contrast. So I'm going to kind of explain a little bit of how the physicality side of things works. I think that's a little bit easier to understand. And then we'll translate that into the whole mind-body connection when it comes to the psychology, the spirituality, and the emotional side of things when it comes to the brain and how that works with developing patterns, right? So most of us, from a physicality standpoint, have built ourselves into certain patterns based off of how we've moved our body for however long we've been alive, right? 10, 20, 30 years. Most of us that were together at that Reaching Beyond experience with Kyle were, 30 plus at that point. So we've had a lot of years under our belt of moving in certain ways, okay? So I want you to think about our movement patterns as kind of like skiing. This is the best way I like to describe it, is if you keep going down the same path, the same run over and over and over again, those grooves of your skis get deeper and deeper and deeper. And this is the neural patterning, the neural pathway that our brain kind of develops, because it likes consistency, it likes repetition because it's less costly, right? The more we do a pattern, the more ingrained it becomes, the less energy it costs our brain and our body to then do the same pattern. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, no matter whether or not we're trying to learn a new skill or a new movement pattern, our brain is always going to try and find that path of least resistance and go down it all the time. So in order to break the pattern, I then have to encourage and motivate you all to explore new areas of movement. And the reason why we do this is because the human brain actually loves variability at the same time. Okay, I know that this sounds really counterintuitive. I just got done telling you how much it likes taking that path of least resistance, but it likes the variability because it allows us to explore these new patterns, these new ways of thinking, and it actually gives us more options for movement. And when we have more options, we take the stress off of specific tissues in the body that we've been using over and over again. And so when it comes to pain and injury, that's usually the culprit. That's the underlying phenomena, is that we're just overloading these tissues. We're overloading our muscles, we're overloading our ligaments, our joint capsules, the meniscus in the knee, or the plantar fascia in the arch of the foot, over and over and over again. Our brain finally waves the white flag and is like, hey, we've had enough over here, right? So it sends out these signals then of pain, discomfort, tightness. We all experience it differently in an effort to actually get you to move differently. Okay, that's the whole reason why we feel these things. And that's where we can then start to dovetail this whole idea of this conscious awareness of how our body's moving. Because if we're never listening to the information our brain and body is telling us in the form of pain, discomfort, tightness, all these types of sensations, we're going to keep spinning our wheels. Okay, so I want you to think of essentially your brain having a map of every single part of your body. Okay, however, our brain doesn't have access to all the areas on that map. And these different areas that it can't access, these are road blockages, these are closures, right? We're going to get around them in some way. But the way we get around them are those compensation patterns, right? Those are those ingrained patterns that we learn how to move our body because they're economical in nature, okay? So my job as a movement expert is to watch you move, find the patterns that you're not comfortable going into, or the areas that your brain doesn't know how to move your body into, and then give you creative opportunities to move into those areas, move into those patterns, to be able to utilize them and express them with whatever it is that you like to do, whether it be swinging a golf club, going fishing, getting on a wake surfboard that we all did, which you, by the way, kicked a lot of ass in.
I sure did.
My own.
I sure did.
Yes, you did. And I am not afraid to admit that, man. That was impressive to watch. You picked up on that really easily. So I have to be able to now take these patterns, give you the opportunity to explore them. I call exploring like your dark zones, the areas you're not used to going into. And when you do that, the brain learns like, oh, this is available to us? Hell yeah. How can we utilize this more? And all of a sudden you start to develop these new neural networks that make you more robust and make you more complex, and then give you more options for movement, which then takes the stress off all those areas that have been bothering you and have been nagging you, that your brain has been telling you about for maybe years.
So let's slow this down, because I want to make sure this is digestible for people. Like, let's talk about it in the sense of our bodies and movement, and then I'd love you to maybe pivot it into some everyday work type of thinking of like patterns of everyday living. But like, just kind of when you talk about all these connections and mapping our body and our head, you're talking about really becoming intentional and aware about what's going on in our body, what we feel, where there's pressure, where there's pain, where there's so talk to us a little bit more about that. Like, how can we do that, number one? And then when you said turn on these dark zones, walk us through a little bit of that conceptually too, because like, I know for me, we did wake surfing, which is an exercise that I have never done, but you didn't just say like, hey, let's go wake surfing. You activated muscles and muscle groups in our body that we normally would be turned off, essentially, right?
Right.
And I think when people think about pain, or they think about movement or doing the things they want to do every day, they don't think about turning on the muscles we don't use every day before you go do those exercises. So I want people to really comprehend this, because this is like the crux of everything, and such powerful content. So walk us through that.
Okay. So what does everybody usually like to do? They like to go to the gym and work out. That is the environment that we associate exercise with, okay? And many of us typically go into the gym and we do the same patterns over and over and over again, whether that be squats or deadlifts or pull-ups, right? And we don't really add much variety into that, right? Or maybe we're not aware of what our body's actually doing in those patterns, okay? We're not aware of these functional limitations or these compensation patterns that we might have. So we can go years of doing the same squat routine over and over and over again and develop things like knee pain and back pain. And then what do? Well, we some of us are like, hey,
we either stop,
hurts.
We just stop.
There it is, right? We stop moving in an effort to like let it rest and let it heal, or maybe somebody gives us some advice to ice it, and then over time, it'll get better, right? Or maybe we go see people who promise to take our pain away, and we get joints adjusted, and we get our tissues manipulated with like scraping tools or cupping or dry needling. And I'm not bashing any of them; they all serve a purpose by any means, but it's just a Band-Aid, right? It's just masking that information, right? Because we never took the time to understand what it was actually telling us. We just slapped the Band-Aid on it,
or we
decided
stopped.
to push it away. But why though? What's the intention behind that? We're doing that under a good intention of trying to get back into the activities that we were previously doing, right? Because they made us feel good about ourselves, and they helped us look better naked, or they allowed us to perform in a rec sport or go golfing or whatever to the best of our ability. Okay, so there's a reason for it. However, if we keep going down that same path over and over and over again, eventually something is going to break, right? And that's where I come in to try and prevent that from happening, right? And this is where we bring in a lot of what I do being more mindset work, right? Because the greatest unexplored territory of movement that we have is actually in between our ears, right? It's in our brain, right? When was the last time you actually sat with your thoughts? When was the last time you actually sat with the feelings that your body was telling you and tried to understand what it actually meant? Right? Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Right? So all this knee pain and stuff, this back pain that we've been experiencing, there's an underlying source. There's an underlying reason for all of it. But what we have to do is sometimes let go of our ego, just calm down, slow things down, breathe, and learn to understand what it's telling us. And sometimes we also need a guide like myself to help uncover the reasons, the sources behind all those issues. And that's exactly what we did with you. And you brought up the whole idea of getting certain muscles activated before going out there and wake surfing, right? And that all comes down to what my superpower is of pattern recognition, right? I understand conceptually what the pattern of wake surfing is going to entail. I know how the body works and the I guess the activation that you're going to need to go into that experience and perform at your best, or to give you the best shot. Correct. To not fall flat in your face and drink half the lake like I did. Okay. So with that, what my goal was for you guys was to learn how to develop an innate and intimate connection between your feet and your hips. Okay. And the hips and the pelvis, because the feet, and you know this, I always say I have like a low-key foot fetish.
Yes,
because the feet are the I am barefoot right now, by the way.
I believe it.
Because the feet are the foundation, right? They are the only connection point that we have with this earth. So from a physicality standpoint, they direct all the forces. They tell the hips and the pelvis what to do. They tell the low back what to do. So if we're not consciously aware of how they're functioning, we have no chance of actually moving our hips and pelvis and low back effectively as well. And then also from a mindset standpoint, I brought up those brain maps earlier, right? Our feet have the highest amount of what we call sensory receptors found anywhere in the body. Okay. So they give our brain a lot of nutritious information about how to move our body. What we do is we keep them in shoes all day long. I call them shoe prisons, foot prisons, because that limits the amount of sensory stimulation that they can receive. All they ever are aware of or know of are the bottom insole, that cushion of the shoe, or the arch support if you're wearing orthotics. And we don't understand what it's like to feel the different textures of the ground and to learn how to sense not only what those different textures are, but what they can tell us about our body, where the different pressures are at, and how that shifts the function of what's going on at the knee, at the hip, the pelvis, and the low back. So that was my ultimate goal, is to develop that connection for you guys so that your brain had a foundational starting point of like, oh, we've been here. We just activated this not too long ago. Let's see if we can use it now for this fun activity.
Yeah. What are some of the most underlooked and undernoticed, I guess, parts of our body for pain and movement?
Oh boy, that is a deep question. And there are a lot of different avenues that you can go down. And I'm going to still dovetail this one back into our work with men, but this will also include women for that matter as well, is we one, lack an understanding of what pain is specifically. And we just kind of went over that, how it's just information and what it's telling us, but along the lines of this mindset piece, right? And our awareness of what's going on inside of our body, it comes down to a lot of the times our sexual function and how our brain is perceiving that in the form of anxiety and how we feel about our body when it comes to confidence, right? So this is an area that
we're going real deep. Here we go.
We are going deep, and the reason why I bring this up is I just recently had an interesting conversation. I work with some pretty high level military guys. Well, I was out working with Navy Special Warfare out in Austin, Texas, not too long ago, and we were giving a presentation on just that, at pain. So we were giving them a 90-minute long presentation on pain, what it is, what it means for the body, how it is expressed in their movement, how it makes them feel. And within 5 minutes, I was relating pain to sexual function in front of these guys. And the reason being is because a lot of these men, and women for that matter, when we experience pain in and around our low back, which is a very common experience, I think like 9 out of 10 people have low back pain, a lot of times it's related to what's going on at the pelvic floor. Okay, so I just got done saying how intimately connected the feet are to the hips and the pelvis. Well, the pelvic floor is a very, very important area, because not only does it hold in your pee and your poo, but also it's very intimately related to the sexual function and pleasure as well. Yeah. And with men, we tend to hold a lot of our stress and a lot of our tension inside of our pelvic floor.
Really?
Okay, so yes. Okay. So in order to understand how this is, why this is the case and how it relates to our pain experience, you have to understand exactly what the pelvic floor is. It's a diaphragm, right? It's just like our respiratory diaphragm, our breathing diaphragm underneath our rib cage. And it's also just like the arches of our feet. They're all domes. Okay.
Wow.
And they all have to go through an excursion. So what I mean by that is they have to go through a lengthening phase to where they can get long and stretched out. And they also want to go through a shortening phase so they can contract and get shorter, right? And lift. Okay. So if we look at this from the association of all three of those together, so feet, pelvic floor, rib cage, or breathing diaphragm, whenever you take a breath in, all of those diaphragms are lengthening and flattening. So they're going towards the ground. Think about it like that. So the arches are flattening, the pelvic floor is flattening, and then also the respiratory diaphragm is lowering down towards the ground. Okay. When we exhale, the exact opposite should happen. The arches will lift, the pelvic floor will lift, and the diaphragm will lift to push the air out of your lungs.
Wow.
Okay. So you can see how this can get a little complicated, right? Because now we're talking a lot about breathing as well. And that's where we always have to start with a lot of this physicality stuff, because it does have a large impact on how we move, how we experience pain, our ability to regulate it, and then clearly has an impact on our sexual function, which for all intents and purposes, right, we are human beings, and one of our main goals and priorities on earth is to procreate and experience pleasure. That's what we are here to do, to pass on genetic material, right? So with that, going back to these high-level military people, I started asking them, like, how many of you guys have things like premature ejaculation, performance anxiety, low libido? Guess how many hands raised?
Everybody, right?
We've all had it. It's a very common occurrence, but it's always very taboo in nature, right?
Of course.
We don't want to, for whatever reason, we're afraid to talk about it. And I have a lot of theories around that too. And,
well, that's why I have Dr. Matthew Zanis on the podcast today, because he's not uncomfortable to talk about the uncomfortable.
No, absolutely not. But think about this for a second, because it's all translatable, right?
Right.
So our confidence in our body and how it moves, and our perception of how confident we are, that is transmitted, right? Our body is essentially a beacon out into the environment for everybody else. We send different energy signals to you who's sitting across a computer screen with me, to people we're walking down the street with, to those that we're sitting around a boardroom meeting with, or for me with all my athletes out there on the field. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing, right? So we have to decide then, well, what kind of impact do we want to have? What kind of energy do we want to transmit? All right. So we think about this from a confidence. That's one of my main goals, is always restore confidence in people's movement and confidence in their bodies. So if we have a low level of confidence, say about how our body's moving, maybe we're in pain all the time, we got low confidence about our performance in the bedroom, right? We have a lot of anxiety around it, surrounding the performance. And then guess how that translated into the boardroom as well? Low level of confidence. And we see this portrayed in the physical nature as well. So think about the people who are kind of rounded over in the shoulders, the rib cage is down, their heart's closed off, the solar plexus is constricted and contracted. Those people are the ones that you're like, why are they so defensive? Like, what's going on with them? Why aren't they so confident? Versus somebody else who's like me, standing here, I'm open, my shoulders are back, my rib cage is flared up, I'm smiling, my heart is open, I'm taking big, deep breaths. Like, that guy's got a lot of energy. That guy's got a lot of confidence in himself.
The physicality is different completely.
100%. And this is where the posture comes in. People say this all the time, that your nonverbal language is way more important than whatever you say. And it's true, because our brains pick up on it, but then we go back to the awareness piece. Are we actually aware of what this information is and what it's telling us, for that matter? Okay. So now all of a sudden we go back to my Navy Special Warfare guys. I had all these guys like sitting back in their chairs. They were relaxed. Next thing you know, we start talking about their boners and how we can improve them. They're like all on the edge of their seat, right? They're all like, ooh, this is interesting. How is this going to make me better at my job? But it actually, like I said, it's all connected too, where from a pain standpoint, like I said, we hold a lot of tension there. So guys specifically tend to be more constricted, more contracted, stuck in a shortened position where that pelvic floor is lifted and we can't breathe into it. We can't lengthen it. So that's one of my major goals with these men, or anybody in general, is to get you to be able to breathe deeply and fully down into your pelvic bowl.
So is that through intention and through focus, or is that like?
It's intentional. It's focused. You have to. It's like a mental representation, like a mental feedback first. So I always have people kind of close their eyes and visualize a lot of this stuff first, and then we get them to actually feel what it's like to lengthen out the pelvic floor. So there's only really one way that you can feel if that pelvic floor is lengthening. So I typically have guys and they're sitting down either on a chair with their testicles hanging off the front.
Interesting.
or you're seated in like a cross-legged pattern on the floor. Maybe your hips are elevated on a bolster or something, or a yoga block. And what you do is you take your finger and you put it in between your testicles and your anus, right? That's a little area.
And you can feel it.
Well, it's called your perineum. Some people refer to it as the grundle.
Yeah.
Yeah, grundle, whatever you want, dark zone. So that's a real dark zone down there, my friend. Anyway, so when you put your finger there and you take a breath in, you should feel that push out into your finger.
Wow.
And if you can
who knew we were going to talk about this today? Look at this.
Oh, man. How did we get down this rabbit hole? But think about this, though, because if you can't breathe fully into there, you can never lengthen out that pelvic floor, okay? Which means you're stuck in a constricted space, which means you're literally tight butthole. And when you're literally tight butthole, it activates what we call your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight response, right? So you're constantly on edge, you're constantly anxious, you're constantly trying to, have a situational awareness of what's going on in your surroundings because you're afraid somebody's going to attack you. Like
you're not really. So basically, what you're saying is you're really not fully relaxed or fully calm or present or empowered. Like there's still something in your body, that energy is still tight, and what you're saying is we got to focus on releasing that.
Right. And guess what happens when you have sex then? Your brain's like, well, shit, this is a real quick and easy way to release that energy.
Which is why.
Yeah. The premature ejaculation comes into it. Your brain's like, well, shit, we got to get rid of this as quickly as possible. We know this is a very effective route. So I told you I had theories on this stuff of how we actually put ourselves down into this rabbit hole of performance anxiety and all this sexual dysfunction and pain. And I really truly do believe it starts at a very early age with our environment and how we're raised culturally. I was raised, I'll tell you, I can speak for myself here. I was raised in a very predominant Catholic household. Okay. I was an altar boy for like 11 years. So we were deep into it. And we were always taught that masturbation would like make you go blind or it'd fall off. So they put this fear of God into you, that it's not okay to touch yourself. But biologically, what does every little boy want to do?
And right? They do it fast.
Real quick. They figure out real quick that it feels good. So they go upstairs real quick and try to rub one off before mom and dad catches them. So we go back to that skiing example of these neural programs that we keep ingraining. So now we're just teaching our nervous system to come quickly. Anytime we experience pleasure, we got to come quickly. Because we've done that from such an early age and for such a long time. We now translate that over into adulthood, into meaningful relationships with others. And it's no different. It's the same stimulation.
You're right. I didn't even think about that.
Right? So now we put ourselves in these situations where we can't really control it because once again, it is so neurally ingrained. And then we go into a sexual encounter with another and we already have it in the back of our head. This is going to happen. Here comes the performance anxiety. Here comes the stress. Pelvic floor is super locked up, tight butthole. Get out of here so you can go fall asleep.
Let's talk about it. How can people relate this physical awareness into the boardroom, into their meetings, into interactions, into their interview perhaps of a new job or maybe a really important strategic meeting, being aware. And I know like I've done a couple of UPWs with Tony Robbins and he talks about like peak state and like Superman pose and all that, right? And it really does change the chemistry of our brain, changes our hormone levels, reduces all our cortisol levels, increases oxytocin. There's literal chemical changes. And so what advice do you have for people who are like want to get into that state, want to change their emotional state as they interact in their business life?
Okay. So I'm going to tell another story again, just to help make this relatable to people, because, going down this conscious awareness piece, that is the key. That is the foundation. You have to be aware that there's actually a problem going on before you can fix it, right? And when it comes to performance, whether that be on the field or in the boardroom, the body responds in the same way. So my personal story is I always hated public speaking. Hated it. Had such a fear around it. I even took a public speaking class in college. It was miserable. I got stressed out about it. And it was one of those situations where there were certain things happening in my body that literally made it impossible for me to perform, to get up on stage and actually deliver any type of meaningful speech or performance. Okay, it is literally the same thing if we're going to go in for a high profile interview or going out and trying to perform at the Super Bowl. The body is responding the same way. There's these certain hormonal chemical soups that occur inside the body that tell our body how to respond. So for example, it puts us into this sympathetic state, which is characterized by a very high heart rate. You start sweating. Like you see, if you ever notice, like your palms get sweaty, you're not breathing, or if you are, it's very shallow and in the upper chest. Okay, digestion shuts down, your muscles get real tight and tense, and you get twitchy, and then your brain is so super narrowed and focused, you got like tunnel vision. Okay, which you can learn to channel. It could be a good thing, but these are all essentially the signs and symptoms of you being in a sympathetic state that's telling your body to either
fight or flight. Like we're in somebody. We're in fight or flight, right?
Or to freeze.
Or freeze,
okay?
right?
And that's an often overlooked one as well, as this freezing component. And that's where like the whole pain and injury stuff comes in when the muscles are super tense, right? And they never relax. That will cause pain, discomfort as well. But then also from a mental standpoint, the brain literally freezes.
So how do we pivot? If we can be aware of that, like those are the senses of happening in our body, what do we do to pivot that?
The only way that we can access that is through our breath. Okay, so there's this old saying that the breath is the king of the brain is the king of the body. Our breath can literally change the way our body is responding. It's like a hack into our nervous system.
Okay.
So there are many different ways that you can utilize the breath to either energize yourself, okay, or to calm yourself down. Okay. And it all depends on it depends on the ratio essentially of your inhale to exhale. Okay, so for example, if we take somebody who is fearful of public speaking like I was back then, or we're really nervous and anxious going into a very important interview or a meeting, it's going to be very valuable for you to slow your breath down. But remember, you have to be consciously aware of what it's doing first, right? So if you notice that you're hyperventilating, it's all from the chest, we need to then take it out of the chest and push it down into the pelvic floor, down into the belly. Okay, and the way that we do this is by making our exhales longer than our inhales. Okay, so if we inhale fully, the way that I describe this for people is that when you inhale, I want you to envision the air moving down the front of your body into your pelvic bowl between your hips. And then when you exhale, the air is moving up your spine and out the top of your head.
Like a cycle.
So it's like a circle, like it's circular in nature. Okay. And then I make them take that air in and out through like pursed lips, almost like you're whistling or drinking through a straw. Because what that does, it creates a little bit of resistance, and it forces your diaphragm and your obliques and the intercostal muscles, all these different respiratory muscles, to then have to work just a little bit harder and push air down to these areas that you may have not even known were accessible before. Okay?
Fascinating.
All right, so let's just say, for example, you take a 4-second inhale. I would shoot for then like a 6 to 8 second exhale. Okay, that's a very, very quick and easy way to start to calm down and down regulate that nervous system. Okay. And there's a special little technique that I like to do, a little nuance to this. It's a sip and hold technique. So we go through these inhale exhales, and then we bring air in fully, as much air as we can get in, and then sip a little, sip a little. So you're trying to get a little bit of extra air down into these dark zones, these areas that we're not used to breathing into. And what that does is it actually changes the blood chemistry around.
Yeah, I've heard of this. It pushes, and it also pushes oxygen to places that, or blood even, that it normally doesn't get to, right? Because it's like forcing it. It's like pushing harder, right?
Exactly. Versus something like many people may have heard of like Wim Hof breathing.
Yep.
This is what we call like a 2-part breath, where it's that.
Right.
So it's a hyperventilatory technique where we're trying to get as much oxygen into the body as possible. That is more of your energizing technique. That's where people then can use that to get themselves amped up, which may be useful in a situation going out and performing at the Super Bowl or something. Or like maybe I can actually tell you, one of my Olympic shooters, he's a shotgun athlete, before he goes out and performs, he yawns. Like he gets tired. he gets fatigued. That's his nervous system like trying to shut him down, essentially from like an anxiety standpoint, but it's responding in a different way. So for somebody like him, we go through this hyperventilatory stuff to get him awake and focused.
Yeah,
so
interesting.
It's just understanding how your body responds so you know which tool then to implement.
I want to ask you personally, you are such a high performer. You are in this business of high athletics and teaching people how to operate at the highest level. What does your daily routine look like for you to perform at this level?
Dude, you know what? So I am very, very routine oriented. I love my routines. Right. And it kind of drives my girlfriend crazy sometimes because she's the exact opposite. She's more into her feminine energy, a free flowing energy and love and all that stuff. Yeah, which I love about her because it helps balance me out. But my routines, I stick to in the mornings. They're very specific for me. That's my time. I literally use the first 3 hours of the day for myself before I even start my day and start interacting with other people. So I wake up, okay, and the first thing that I go and do is I drink salt water. Probably about 22 ounces of salt water. That's sodium, magnesium, potassium. You got some in there right now?
That's right. I got this water with some magnesium and Himalayan salt.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And that is actually great because it actually will start to upregulate your nervous system. You're getting all the correct elements, electrolytes in there to start getting everything firing.
That's right.
Appropriately again. So I'll drink all of that. I'll kind of put my contacts in, brush my teeth, wash my face. But then I go into a dark room. And this is where I begin my breathing practice. Okay. So dark rooms, I'm sitting on a little bit of a bolster, crossed legs, and I go through my breath practice depending on what I feel like I need for that day. So maybe I do need to feel a little more amped up and I'll do a few rounds of that Wim Hof style of breathing. Or maybe I feel like, hey, I need to like focus and set my energy in a calm, stable state. And then I'll go into more of my long, slow exhales. But I also incorporate movement with that, specific spinal movement. Okay. So we talked earlier about how the different diaphragms move with the inhale versus the exhale. I'll be sitting on that little bolster. I'll take a breath in. And every time I inhale, I'm dumping my pelvis down. So we call it an anterior tilt, or my pubic bone moving towards the floor. My rib cage is lifting up, and then my chin kind of gently comes down. As I exhale, my pelvic bowl then tilts back, my rib cage comes down, and my chin juts forward. And on my exhales, I'm also squeezing my my butthole and lifting my balls. And what that does is it gets the pelvic floor to tilt back a little bit. And then you gain more conscious awareness over that pelvic floor. And then you can go utilize it for other things like sexual performance and ejaculation control and all that. But that's my time to practice those reps. And I call them spinal cogs. So I'm literally moving in a cog fashion, kind of like machine components moving on each other. And I'm getting my vertebrae and my spine moving and fluid and lubricated up for that day. Because when you sleep at night, fluid fills into the disc spaces, and that's why some people feel really stiff. So it's a great way to start to
open the body.
Open the body up is a really great way to put that. After I go through my breathing practice, I then meditate for like 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how much time I have. And after the meditation is when I journal. So I'll go through 15, 20 minutes worth of journaling, get the thoughts out of my head, set intentions for the day, that type of thing. And then I go directly into my movement practice, which at this current time frame is involving achieving the middle splits and the forward backward splits. Okay, project balls to the floor. I'm like 90% there.
I know. I saw you had a post online where you did some splits on something, and you were like, I think maybe 60 to 80% there. I was like, holy crap, go Matt, baby.
Yeah,
look at that.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're
good
getting
for
there.
you,
We're
man.
Almost there. So then that takes me to about 9:15, and that's when I shower and then get on with the rest of my day, which usually involves
beautiful.
A lot of different things these days, my friend. There's
I
so
love
many
it.
different irons in the
I know
fire.
you're doing so much. I love that routine, and I never really thought about incorporating breath work into my morning routine. I'm incorporating the journaling and the meditation, of course, and the movement. Yeah. But and then the other thing I don't do about movement, which I need to learn from you, is to push the boundaries of your everyday movement. So like you go to the gym, you go to run, you go biking, but that's the everyday stuff you do. But the actual morning movement should be activities that you normally don't do to create those other activations. So I think that's a really healthy reminder. I guess as we wrap up, I wanted to ask you one final question.
Sure.
For you, what does it mean to live a rich life?
Oh, yes. I love this type of question because it makes me have to think, right? And typically when I think of richness, and I'm going to explain this here in just a second, so bear with me. So I used to think of richness as being money, right? It was very monetary in nature,
Sure.
to where me being rich meant I had expendable income, was financially stable, and that was the old me, okay? I used to think that that was the ultimate goal in life. And believe me, I love making money just like anybody else because it does allow you to do things that you want to do. But for me, the richness is actually following my passion and my purpose. And what I mean by that is being able to express it in different ways, whether that be out there on the Olympic fields with my athletes and living my purpose and passion out there with them, and or just here at home with the girlfriend and the dogs and doing the things that I want to do and knowing that they are fulfilling me, right? So there's this idea of being able to fill your own cup and fill yourself with energy and not used to neglect that in the effort, the intention of making more money.
Sure.
And neglected all these different areas of life. So the richness for me is just staying true to who I am and staying true to the things that do give me all the energy that I need.
Well, that was really beautiful. And, I will validate that because I think that you do that really well and beautifully and really sincerely. And who you are and what you stand for and the work that you do, it's just so well embodied in that message. And it's just such an honor to have you on the podcast, just honor to be friends and to know you. And I'm just super honored that you came today and shared all this knowledge. Like, you're such a wealth of knowledge. So amazing. I guess if people want to connect with you, brother, and learn more from you, want to get more of your content, how can they reach out and where can they connect?
The best way to go watch me and all my crazy antics and adventures is on Instagram. I do post a lot of valuable information on there. A lot of funny stories, as you know. You can follow along my Project Balls to the Floor in case you're curious. But then you're also welcome to reach out to me at my email, Matthew@rootedinmovement.com. That's the best place to get a hold of me, or shoot me a DM on Instagram, whichever is easier.
Really appreciate your time, brother. Thank you so much, and have an amazing rest of your day. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, man. This is an absolute pleasure. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you.